Tad japas tadartha bhavanam. That sound, Om, should be recited repeatedly and meditated upon, contemplating its meaning. So, as we've previously stated, that Vyasa has said that the inherent or natural relationship between Ishvara and Om is eternal and not a creation of this world or the people of this world. Now here we are introduced to this terminology, or this word rather, japa. Japa was the recitation of spiritual or transcendental sound. Since ancient times, it was often practiced by the devout yogis using beads of different natures that were used to help focus the attention. So it was stated that with the use of japa, the repetition of sacred sound or mantra, one engages in utilizing these beads. One engages their sense of touch, and in reciting the mantra, there is some usage of the organ of speech, and one hears themselves softly reciting the spiritual sound. And so 3 of the 5 senses are now engaged, and it was considered that this was a way to bring the mind into greater focus on the pursuit of this spiritual practice. The use of spiritual sound in japa should be understood and appreciated from the perspective that it is by this means that one has the opportunity to become immersed in that which is transcendental, or immersed in transcendence. So sometimes the example was given that just as something which is unclean, and of course I'll use a rather gross example here, like a dog passes stool on the grass, and that's something that's incredibly bad smelling, incredibly unclean. But just by virtue of its being constantly exposed to the rays of the sun, over time, all of the dirtiness is removed, and the stool is bleached and becomes chalk-like, and all impurities are removed by the power of the sun, which is a purifying agent in this case. In a very similar manner, when the devoted yogi engaged in the recitation of transcendental sound like Om as a form of spiritual practice or japa, that what we are doing is placing both our body and mind, as well as ourself, the Atman, within, in the proximity of that which is transcendental. And if you can visualize, you see people bathe in the Ganga, standing waist deep with offering their deep respects and immersing themselves in the water. In a similar manner, by becoming absorbed in the recitation of this spiritual sound or transcendental sound, one is immersed in that which is transcendental and becoming purified. The consciousness is becoming purified, the mind and the heart, the dust and the cobwebs that are covering the Atman itself are being removed and purified. So the recitation or the practice of japa is of course best performed in the mood of contemplative and very affectionate absorption within with a heart of surrender and devotion. We've already heard that it is through Ishvara Pranidhana, this deep surrender to Ishvara, that one is able to experience the greatest spiritual realization and experience. And we are being directed by Patanjali as to how one should do this, and Vyasa is expounding on that. So you'll notice that one of the words here being used is bhavanam. Bhavanam literally meaning contemplating or absorption in a state or dwelling upon something. It describes how one should recite and meditate upon these spiritual or transcendental sounds. A point I'd like to make is that this is not a mental state. We're not talking in the use of this word here actually in the deeper way in which it should be appreciated. We're not talking about creating a state of mind. What we're talking about is a very deep spiritual absorption or immersion. And while this word bhava is used in different ways in yogic texts and in Buddhism, it's used in a variety of ways, all referencing this state of absorption. What has been referenced here by Patanjali is somewhat different. If we see this syllable, this transcendental syllable Om, as simply being a tool for me to use to become more focused in my meditation, that is okay. One can see things that way. But if one actually appreciates the connection between spiritual sound and Ishvara, how they are actually inseparable, and how spiritual sound actually contains Ishvara, it contains the relationship between the Purusha and Ishvara. It contains a vast world of spiritual reality. Then by contemplating this understanding, it will become an impetus for the individual, the devoted yogi, to actually achieve what it is that Patanjali is speaking about here. Something which most of the commentators don't actually speak of is that this word bhava, it also has a much deeper meaning. A deeper meaning that points to the feeling or the experience of an extremely deep and transcendental affection, or to have a deep and affectionate attachment for Ishvara, and which is in its highest state manifest as a divine form of love or prema. So if we want to look at the use of this word here by Patanjali, it definitely opens the doorway into a much deeper spiritual experience. So Vyasa is fundamentally pointing out in his commentary that japa actually becomes a principal manifestation of Ishvara pranidhana. If we understand this, pranidhana is a surrendering of oneself to Ishvara, then the principal way in which one may develop this is through the exercise of engagement in japa in the appropriate way, not just in a mechanical recitation, but a recitation that is deep and affectionate, and where one is very much absorbed in and contemplating upon the very nature of Ishvara. So one of the other very famous commentators, Vijnana Bhikshu, he states in his commentary that his name, meaning Ishvara's name, is the pranava, or Om. And I'll just make this, offer this explanation here. One of the ways, there are so many ways of understanding pranava, but one of the ways of understanding nava means new, that which is new. And when you say pranava, it means that which is eternally fresh, or eternally fresh, which is the nature of Ishvara. So his name, Ishvara's name, is the pranava, or Om. And pranidhana, or surrender or devotion, consists of contemplating him and by chanting Om. This culminates in direct perception of him. This absorption, samyama, in the supreme Ishvara is the foundational practice in asampragyata samadhi and of spiritual liberation. So we may see that different people and different commentators may understand the state of samadhi being spoken of here as being sampragyata, as opposed to asampragyata, which is stated here. And my own spiritual master has pointed out that sampragyata samadhi is that which is attained primarily through philosophical searching and through meditative inquiry, and fundamentally through what I would refer to as mechanical means. Whereas the state of asampragyata samadhi is a state of perpetual spiritual liberation, unlike sampragyata samadhi, where we've spoken of previously, where even great and powerful yogis have or can fall from that position. So Interestingly, in this commentary of Vijnana Bhikshu, he continues to make the point that, on the other hand, after speaking about spiritual liberation and the culminating in the direct perception of Ishvara, he says, on the other hand, that absorption in the personal Atman is a secondary goal or achievement. So here he is drawing a distinction, and I'll use terms that are probably somewhat commonly used, the term of God realization and self-realization, and that they are connected but actually two different things, and that it is through the process of Ishvara Pranidhana that one can come to fully realize Ishvara and simultaneously have a realization of their own self, their own spiritual being, the nature of the Atman. But that was considered secondary in importance to the first. So what we're getting here from Patanjali is a clear understanding that the purpose and goal of yoga was to attain the Supreme, or Ishvara, and that the japa of the pranava was the principal means. This is also reinforced, and I'll just mention another verse from the Bhagavad Gita. I think it is the 17th chapter and the 24th shloka, where it states that transcendentalists begin all of their endeavors with the chanting of Om in order to attain the Supreme. So there are huge amount of commentary, Vedic commentary on this transcendental vibration Om. One of the frequent references is that it is sometimes referred to as Tara, which means the deliverer. And the famous commentator of the Bhagavad Purana, Sridhar Swami, describes Omkara as the Tarankura. Tarankura meaning the seed of deliverance from the material world, that it is primarily through the meditation upon the usage of the contemplation upon Omkara and Ishvara that one can become delivered from material existence. In his commentary, Vyasa interestingly quotes a verse from the Vishnu Purana. And in this verse, it states that from Swadhyaya, which means the recitation of mantra, of sacred sound, from Swadhyaya, let yoga be practiced, and from yoga, let reciting of mantras be performed. And through the glory of such chanting and of such yoga, the Supreme Soul, Paramatma, is revealed. So in this very wonderful verse, we are seeing reference to this word Paramatma, and how the individual being is known by this term Atma or Purusha, and the supreme being or Ishvara, the Purusha, the Purusha Vishesha, he is referred to as the Param Atma, the supreme. And it uses the term, Vyasa uses this term, Paramatma Prakashate, which means that there's a literal, not a figurative, a literal revelation of Ishvara. So when we speak of this, I will just reference once again something that we brought up in one of the earlier sutras, and that is the term of the Avaroha Panta, which means the descending path or the descending process. So I had made mention that there were two categories of spiritual path, one referred to as the ascending process or Aroha Panta, and the descending process, the Avaroha Panta. So when we see this term, Paramatma Prakashate, it means, this word Prakash means to manifest or to become evident or to reveal. And this is quite a deep idea that some people may actually struggle with. What we are hearing here and what we understand by our own existence, our own life and our experience here, is that it is by the exercise of our will that things happen, meaning actions or karma. Karma or action is something that begins with an idea or a reflex, whatever it is, and then it is manifest as action, as an expression of will. But in this case, we must consider whose will is being exercised in this revelation, in this manifestation, in this prakash, this showing of something. It is by the will of the Paramatma. So just like I mentioned earlier, the vast, limitless ocean of living beings are known as Atma. The Purusha Vishesha, he is known as the Paramatma. Ishvara is the Paramatma. So we have these terms, Atma, Paramatma, or Purusha and Parampurusha, speaking of the two categories of beings. And many commentators, and in more recent times, Tirumalai Krishnamacharya would often reference the use of this Sanskrit term, anugraha. Anugraha literally means grace or benediction, or to mercifully bestow. And so what we're being shown here is that by fundamentally pleasing Ishvara, by his grace, he reveals himself. It is not that I, on my own strength, can come to know the highest spiritual reality. I am actually dependent upon his exercise of will. This is a really deep subject and something that we can perhaps go into in the second pada. Now we can speak at more length on this. But what it's pointing to, if you will recall that we have mentioned previously that self-realization means the realization of my, meaning the Atma, the Purusha, the Atma, my essence, my position, and my natural function. So we've already spoken about how my essence is Brahman. Brahman is that which is spiritual, but that is not the complete picture. For me to have a full realization of my eternal spiritual nature, there has to be the realization of my position and my natural function. The position is what has actually been somewhat revealed here. That there is the living being, Nitya Nityanam, Chaitanya Chaitanyanam, that amongst all eternals and conscious beings, there is one that is unique or different. This is the Purusha Vishesha. And this is Ishvara. And the question then becomes, if I am equal with all other Atmas, is there any distinction or difference between this Purusha Vishesha, the Ishvara, and myself, the Atman and Paramatma? And there must become an understanding that, of course, I am subordinate to Ishvara, which should be really evident after reading the previous sutras, where Patanjali speaks about the characteristics of Ishvara, how he is transcendental to time, he is the teacher of ancient teachers, he is omniscient. His omniscience is unsurpassed, unequaled and unsurpassed. So this gives us an understanding. So if Ishvara is in a superior position to my own, then by becoming surrendered to Ishvara, he may bestow grace upon me in the form of full spiritual realization. So the constitutional position of the Atman is as the eternal servitor of Ishvara, the Lord. And we are dependent upon his divine grace or intercession for realization and liberation from material entanglement. Thank you.